17 U.S.C. 107 federal law allows citizens to use copyrighted media for fair use. That is criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody.
Uma, Yahweh, arise of you, O Yahweh. Uma, let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Let all of Yasharah, Yisrael, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh, give him thanks by saying hallelujah.
Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Into All Truth. My name is Rachel. We welcome donations, and we thank you, everyone, for donations that you made for calendars and cookbooks, which the update should be coming out before the new Hebrew year, the new Israelite year. You'll get the calendar and the cookbook. Just remind me to send you an update once you've purchased it with the proof of receipt. And I pray that as you listen to this study, that the Ruach HaKodesh will lead you into all truth and show you things to come. Baruch atah kulam, in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach.
Touchdown. The Russian swans have come to South Africa. Blackjack, NATO reporting name, officially the Tu-160, Russia's strategic nuclear bombers. This is the furthest south that they have ever been. We're closer to Antarctica than we are to Russia at this point. Now, ordinarily, a nuclear bomber doesn't make the most welcome guest, but this is a symbol of trust between Russia and South Africa.
First, I want to say it's a pleasure for us as South African Air Force to receive the Russian Federation Air Force to visit us.
Come on, we can read between the lines. Vladimir Putin is hosting dozens and dozens of African leaders. The world is changing, and Russia's message is clear. It's back in Africa. Old empires die and new powers are born. And for Russia, 21st century, Africa is the place to be.
We are definitely in prophetic times. So this video is about the four carpenters and the prophecy of their defeat of the king of Babylon. Two different prophecies mixed together. These are the four carpenters who repatriate Israel to their land. We are in that prophetic time right now where Africa and India / Medo-Persia, China, and Russia are lining up to go to war and to defeat the king of Babylon. And so I want to go into the prophecy of the four carpenters, and finally I'm going to close with the prophecy of the open doors to the promised land. Now, this is my interpretation of the prophecy. It's not necessarily a rhema word, but as things are unfolding, we're getting closer and closer. And so Yah designed Israel to be part of the salvation of the world. Not only would Yahushua come through the line of Israel, but Israel are the kings and priests unto the nations. And so there is a seed of Israel that matters to Yah. And I'm going to speak about various bloodlines and fallen angel seed and everything, but this is to inform you about Torah and the laws that were broken and to give you an understanding of the spiritual perspective that is built into the various seeds that Yah has planted or not planted. So Yah's will is that none should be lost who are written in his Lamb's Book of Light. But nonetheless, whoever sins against Israel sins against the apple of his eye. And so I'm trying to explain to you the judgments and sins of people groups, not individuals who choose Yah or Yahusha. And so I'm very clear on my stance that Israel is the people of the transatlantic slave trade, and the Gentiles got that identity temporarily. There's also groups like the Canaanites, whom Jesus called dogs, and that was because they worshiped dogs. They worshiped the canine dog, Anubis. So when I'm speaking about these people groups and not mixing in with them and law and Torah, it's not a discrimination against the people groups, because Yah desires that everyone enter into his house via his kings and priests to be saved. But if you are a so-called Gentile or a descendant of Ashkenaz who has been in the identity of Israel, you just simply remain in that identity, but understand who the true seed of Israel is, so that you can have salvation and understand the sins of your fathers, so you can confess them in order to enter into the house. Israel is also called to confess the sins of their fathers, for Yahuwah delivers judgment for the sins of the fathers unto the third and fourth generation. All right, so that's important to remember when confessing your sin and being saved in Yahushua HaMashiach, not Esau's Christ. So the reason why I wanted to do this video is because I've explored these scriptures on the invasion of the promised land and how it goes about. And there's a prophecy of how it takes place. In addition to that, there's also the prophecy of 4 carpenters repatriating Israel to their land. And I've done this analysis before based on Israel being where we thought it was, and now I'm going to do it based on it being Africa. And of course, what is between Africa and South America, because that's actually where I think the true land is. It's in the midst of the sea, in the center of the triangle, the golden triangle, if you want to call it, where Atlantis was, because the scripture talks about smiting the 7 streams and Israel walking back to their land dry shod. So it's definitely connected to Africa. But Africa is the motherland because it's the head, right? So with that being said, I want to go into the 4 carpenters because, you know, upon studying the 4 carpenters again, I've discovered, you know, some new information, because now I'm looking at other texts. And so let's get into the open door to the promised land and the 4 carpenters. All right, so the 4 carpenters are described as 4 artificers, okay? 4 artificers. And so it's going to be by prophecy and scripture that we determine who these people are. So the 4 carpenters, Zechariah 2. And I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, 4 horns. And I said to the angel that spoke with me, what are these, my Lord? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah and Israel and Jerusalem. And the Lord showed me 4 artificers. And I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that scattered Judah, and they broke Israel into pieces, and none of them lifted up his head. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands, even the 4 horns, the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yahuwah to scatter it. And I lifted up my eyes, and I looked, and behold, a man in his hand with a measuring line. And I said to him, whither goest thou? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth of it, and what is the length of it. And behold, the angel that spoke with me stood by, and another angel went forth to meet him, and spoke to him, saying, run and speak to that man, saying, Jerusalem shall be fully inhabited by the reason of the abundance of men and cattle in the midst of her. And I will be to her, saith Yahuwah, a wall of fire round about, and I will be for a glory in the midst of her. Hallelujah. So you guys, that is the promise of the end of the scattering, the final regathering. But we should take a look at this, because these are the translations, 2 different translations. And I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, 4 horns. And I said to the angel that spoke with me, what are these things, my Lord? And he said to me, these are the horns that have scattered Judah and Israel and Jerusalem. And Elohim showed me 4 artificers. And I said, what are these coming to do? And he said, these are the horns that scattered Judah, and they broke Israel in pieces. And none of them lifted up his head. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands, even the four horns, the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yahuwah to scatter it. Okay, so that is the Septuagint version. And down here is the KJV version. Then I said, what come these to do? And he spake, saying, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man did lift up his head. But these are come to fray them, to cast out the horns of the Gentiles, which have lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it. So this is King James, and it's a Masoretic text translated by the Ashkenazis. So it's very clear here when we read that it says these are the horns that scattered Judah, and they broke Israel into pieces, and none of them lifted up their head or had any sympathy. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands, even the four horns, the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yahuwah to scatter it. So the same people who scattered and lifted up their horns against Israel are the same ones coming to try to sharpen Israel for their purpose. Now it says in this one, they've come to cast out the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it. But in this one, it's saying that these are the very same ones who scattered it. And I think the Septuagint is right, and we're going to see that that's true. Now, I want to focus on the term artificer. An artificer is a skilled worker, a craftsperson, one that contrives, devises, or constructs something, a deceptive or devious person. So we often hear that these are the four carpenters. Proper word is artificers, artificers. And so this is who they are: Africa, Iran, Russia, and China. All right. And so Iran is like the real Medo-Persians, or part of that land was also Assyria. That's a whole section we've gone into in the other videos on the land of Ham and everything. And so we're going to get into the blurry lines around who the Medo-Persians really were, because they're a combination of Japheth and Shem, and the Assyrians were right next door. There's also Africa. Now this is Egypt, Islam, the Sudan, Ethiopia, the Danites, the Midianites. Remember, I told you in the other videos on Prester John that when Joseph went into captivity, the Midianites took him up. They sold him to the Ishmaelites, who sold them to the Egyptians, and then the Edomites kept them captive, and then the Midianites helped them with their release, and so on and so forth. So these are the descendants of Abraham, all right, who war with Israel, just like these are the descendants of Shem, mixed in with Japheth a little bit, who war with Israel. And these nations are also mixed with other nations. Okay, and so there's China, who I'm going to call the Khans, and the Huns and Canaan, because the Huns, the Hun, are obviously Mongoloid. They're a mix of Canaan and Japheth. And then obviously Canaan is a descendant of Ham. And then we have Russia, who are the Khazars, Tartaria, Gog, and Magog. Okay? And so these are the nations that we're going to find both scattered Israel, and these are also the nations that are coming to what does it say? That come forth to sharpen them for their hands. So if you'll notice or remember in my videos on the Muslims, I keep reiterating over and over again that they are going to try to usurp the identity of Israel and move with Israel through the regathering. But of course, Yah is going to ultimately have it his way. And they're trying to get ahead of it all. Okay? And that's the strategy, because this is why you can't say that there are no Black Edomites. And I'm going to show you very clearly that there are. This is the way that Hasitan is strategizing by holding on to his Black players to try and usurp the kingdom again. All right? And so I've talked about that in my The Return of the Scepter video, so you can go and check that out. All right, so let's get into these four artificers, okay? And notice how Artificer can mean an artist or a builder or master builder. I just did a Google search for images on artificers and builders, and this is the image that came up. And this is obviously a Masonic type building. I couldn't even find out what it was. It was just a random photo. And you see it's got a tree with 6 branches, and then it's got the pineal pine cone at the top. And so this is clearly Masonic imagery in a Masonic temple. And these are the master builders. These are the architects, the artificers. So these aren't just carpenters. These are those who maketh a lie, okay? But this is the technical definition. Master builder or master mason is a central figure leading construction projects in pre-modern times and precursor to the modern architect and engineer. So the engineers we know are associated with masons, and architecture is also associated with masons. Okay, so these are the 4 carpenters or artificers. Okay, and prophetically, Esau, Edom took the top branch, took Israel and planted them in Babylon. So that's what this top pineal gland signifies. All right, so here's one of the key scriptures that helps us to identify some of these 4 carpenters. All right, so this is in the book of Ezra 15:20. Ezra, descendant of Zadok, and Aaron of the tribe of Levi, captive to the Medo-Persia and Artaxerxes. Behold, saith Yahuwah, I will call together all the kings of the earth to reverence me, which are from the rising of the sun, from the south, from the east, and Libanus, to turn themselves one against another and repay the things that they have done to them. The fire is gone forth from his wrath and has consumed the foundations of the earth, and the sinners like straw that is kindled. Behold, an horrible vision, and the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon the earth, that they which hear them shall fear and tremble. Also the Carmanians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood. And from the land of the Assyrians shall the enemy besiege them and consume some of them. And in their hosts shall be fear and dread and strife among their kings. Behold, clouds from the east and from the north and unto the south. And they are very horrible to look upon, full of wrath and storm. And they shall go steadfastly unto Babylon and make her afraid. And they shall come unto her and besiege her, and the star and all the wrath shall they pour out upon her. And then shall the dust and smoke go up to the heaven, and they that shall be about her shall bewail her. Okay, so there's a couple of groups we have to look at here, and that is, we're talking about people who are from the rising of the sun, from the south and from the east, and from Libanus, okay? So Libyan or Lebanon, because we still don't really have the right geography. And the nations of the dragons of Arabia. So we know the Arabians are part of this. People from the so-called East. They always call China the East, but it's not. But there you go. And the Carmanians. Who are the Carmanians? And from the land of the Assyrians. And so let's take a look. So the Medo-Persian kingdom is the second kingdom that is mentioned in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And it is mentioned that 4 kingdoms would arise that would rule over and enslave Israel before the coming of Yahusha and their return to their land. And so this is represented in this image of this Babylonian statue where the head is of gold and the chest is of silver. And the Medo-Persian kingdom is represented by the chest because it has, it's got 2 breasts and 2 arms on it. And it's a kingdom that is a mixed kingdom of Japheth and Shem, the Medo-Persian kingdom. So Daniel 2:39 says, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. More detail is given in Daniel 7:5, and behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised itself up upon one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto thee, arise, devour much flesh. The book of Isaiah, 175 years before it happened, the Medo-Persian kingdom is also mentioned when it says, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. In succeeding verses, the downfall of Babylon is predicted, and Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when Yahuwah overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is a double prophecy, and this is about to happen again. Why? Because what has happened before will happen again. Syrian captivity of Israel took place after Babylon, when they overtook Babylon. And that was in about around 700 to 800 BC. The Assyrian and Medo-Persian Empire were almost the same empire at one point. That's why the bear holds 3 ribs in its mouth. The Medo-Persian Empire takes Israel captive, and Cyrus plays a particular role, and he's given a special anointing by Yah. And so this is how we begin to tie in the times of the Gentiles beginning. Regarding Esther, in Ezra 6:14 and Nehemiah 2:1 and Daniel 5:3-1, these are all the same person. Cyrus, Artaxerxes, it's just what people from different places in the world called this particular king. And of course, you know who the author of confusion is. So just so you know, so Artaxerxes or Osiris or Darius the Median had a child with Esther, the Hebrew Israelite. She was from the tribe of Benjamin, and that child was called Cyrus, the Persian. And Cyrus is the one, because he's half Hebrew, his mother's Hebrew, he commissions the building of the second temple. Okay? He commissions the building of the second. I really have to apologize for the last study I did. I just rushed through it and it wasn't organized and I just blew it. So I have to go over some stuff with that again. So I'm going to really take my time here so the communication is clear and you guys can enjoy this. So if I'm not making myself clear, this is the prophecy of this second Exodus. The second Exodus. All right? And I want you guys to get ready for it, because at the end, we're going to show you how things are lining up with this prophecy of the open door, about how these nations are trying to conspire to fulfill prophecy, and that is to invade the land of Israel and defeat the Babylonian Empire. And so this is all building towards that. So please stay tuned for the end. All right. Remember, everyone started calling themselves Jews during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, because they went through that whole situation with Esther and Mordecai, her uncle, where they tried to slaughter all of the Jews. And that was one of the sons of Esau. And so because of that, what happens is that everyone, all the Edomites, start calling themselves Jews at this point. In the book of Esther 8:17. And in every province and every city, wheresoever the king's command and decree came, the Jews enjoyed gladness and a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews came upon them. All right. And according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, the Jews admit they incorporated their eternal enemy, the Edomites, into their own religion to become part of their people. All right. They incorporated the eternal enemy, the Edomites, into their own religion to become part of their people. Thus, at this juncture of time, the Edomites were incorporated with the Jewish nation, and their country was called the Greek and Romans Idunia. Okay, this is a Jewish encyclopedia. I'm just showing you that because this is even a time when now Gentiles call themselves Jews, because they're in the Medo-Persian Empire. All right. So this is the beginning of the switch. All right. This is the building of the second temple and the beginning of the switch. But what's so special about Cyrus? What was he commissioned to do? Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yahuwah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yahuwah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahuwah Elohim of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Yehuda. Who is there among you of all his people? His Elohim be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Yehuda's land, and build the house of Yahuwah Elohim of Yasharel. He is the Elohim which is in Jerusalem, and whosoever remaineth any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver, and with gold, and with goods, and with beasts, beside the freewill offering of the house of Elohim that is in Jerusalem. This was 614. The elders of the Jews built it, and they prospered through prophesying of Haggai, the prophet, and Zechariah, the son of Edo, and they built it, and they finished it according to the commandment of Yahuwah of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the house was finished on the third day of the month, on the third day of the month, Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. And just note with that, Yahushua was raised on the third day. All right. So, and then it says, Thus saith Yahuwah to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the 2-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. All right. So Esther, her true Hebrew name is Hadassah, which means renewed covenant. Let's see what the 2-leaved gates are, because remember in the other videos, I have told you that, so you can see in the background here, I don't know if you guys can make it out, but this is a map of Africa, an ancient Chinese map of Africa. And remember, I told you up here, this would be the Mediterranean. These are the 2-leaved gates that Judah secured in Jasher when he went to live in Egypt. His father, Jacob, Israel, told him to secure those gates. So this is before it was all full of water. But these are the 2-leaved gates that Haram-Abith has a secret word to open or close, all right, at his command. And so these are the 2-leaved gates leading into the head of the kingdom, and everyone wants to have the head of the earth, the scramble for Africa, right? Thus says Yahuwah to his anointed, whose right hand I have held to subdue nations before him, to open before him the double doors so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the crooked places straight. I will break into pieces the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron, and I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that it is I, Yahuwah, who call you by your name. I am the Elohim of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel my elect, have I called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. So this is a Gentile who does not know him. I am Yahuwah, and there is no other. There is no Elohim besides me. I will purge you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to its setting that there is none besides me. I am Yahuwah, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, Yahuwah, do all these things. So when we look at this slide, we see Cyrus, and his name is Koresh or Cyrus, and you see the symbol for the lamp. Okay, the kaf, when you see the resh and the shin. So the lamp, the head, and the teeth, the sharp teeth. And so what it means is, possess thou the furnace. In other words, this is the time when the Gentiles possess the light. They take hold of the light. So Israel is a light unto the nations, and now the light is being passed on. Okay, so this is the transition point. That's why I'm starting here. Where I told you in the Prester John videos that Esau had a son and named him Kor also, like the priestly line of Levi had a Kor in it. This is why Kor is so often mentioned later by the Babylonians, because what happens is that Esau overtakes that kingdom and he uses his Kor, Koresh, okay? Remember I said he mimics exactly what Israel does. So he has a Korah, and so now he takes that light. Remember I talked about the meridian of Markor, okay? So this is a king and a priest, all right, in that tradition that they then start taking up. This is in the realm of Medo-Persia, which is right next door to Assyria. And as you know, I don't agree with the current maps. So let's keep going. All right. So one of the things about Cyrus and the role of the Gentiles in these end times is that the role of the Gentiles is to return Israel to the land, to return Israel to the land. What's being proclaimed here is that vessels of silver and gold and offerings, all of these things, he is commissioning to be brought forth like a priest. And what is Israel? Israel is Yah's portion. Yah, it says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my offering shall come. Okay, the offering, so the gold, articles of silver and gold, the light will return. Is light, right? So this is the offering. So he built in the natural this physical temple, and he put forth the money to do it, and he commissioned it because he had a good teaching mother who told him to follow these Hebraic ways and rebuild the temple. All right? And so that's what he does. But in these end times, he must now bring the nation, which is the offering and the temple, back to the land. So that's the role of the Gentiles today. Then rose up the chiefs of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites and all of them whose spirit Elohim had raised to go up to build the house of Yahuwah, which is in Jerusalem. And they were all strengthened in their hands with vessels of silver, gold, and goods, and beasts and precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of Yehudah, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and put them in the house of his Elohim. So they were in captivity to a Babylon, and he had to release the treasured people and the vessels, which is the people, back to be put into the temple. Even those did Cyrus the king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer, and numbered them to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Yehudah. All right? So there we go, the offering. What has happened before will happen again. Now, the Medo-Persians were judged, okay? And I'm going to kind of show you who exactly they are, because they're not the Iranians who are in the land right now, or the Iraqis. Those are all these other 10 nations that have mixed in, the fallen nations that have mixed in with Israel or who have taken over the land. So these are the judgments, right? So Yah went against Damascus with the burden of Damascus, okay? And he said, I will break the bar of Damascus and cut off the inhabitant from the plain of Aven, and him that holdeth the scepter of the house of Eden, and the people of Syria shall go into captivity unto Kirth, saith Yahuwah. So we see the Syrians, the Assyrians are also, that general area is Medo-Persia and Assyria. It's all kind of the same thing because it's the Shemites' lands. It's the land of Aram, okay, and Elam. And these are all the Shemites. All right. And so the punishment, like I said, in 2014, the burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Now, there are other cities that have been ruinous heaps, but even in that land of Iran, it was taken away in 2014. And then this discusses the fortress of Ephraim shall cease. And the kingdom from Damascus and the remnant of Syria, they shall be of the glory of the children, as the glory of the children of Israel. So these things have happened to them. Damascus is waxed feeble and turned herself to flee Fear has seized her, anguish and sorrows have taken her as a woman in travail, because Damascus went under punishment, because they did not remember their brotherly covenant as Medo-Persians, as Shemites, okay? And so Yah punished them. And so the people in those regions have been under judgment for the longest time. That's why Iran is always being attacked. And that's why the economies of the people in India and stuff, because that is the land of Shem. So I believe that's Assyria, actually. And I've shown you that before in videos. We're going to go over it in a second. But they have been under judgment. Remember, Roman Emperor Lucius Septimus Severus, Roman Empire from 193 to 211, after consolidating his rule over the Western provinces, he waged another brief, more successful war against the Parthian Empire, the Persian Empire, sacking their capital in 197 and expanding the eastern frontier to the Tigris. All right, and then it says he enlarged and fortified the Limes Arabicus, Arabia, in the area of Petra, and he campaigned in Africa and Mauritania. This is a black Edomite Roman king defeating Persia. This is judgment on Persia. All right, so the Assyrian Empire, I said before in another video that Esau had taken over the Assyrian Empire. He was, I believe, part of that Assyrian captivity, right? Because this says the Hebrew of Akkadian Teklet Apesara, meaning my trust is in the son of Isara. Isara being the main temple dedicated to the god Ashur in the city of Ashur, was the king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire from 745 BC to his death in 727 BC, one of the most prominent and historically significant Assyrian kings, and is widely regarded as the famous founder of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Neo-Assyrian. Okay, so Esau became the king of Babylon when he killed Nimrod, and Babylon is Egypt. We always go over that. Mitzrayim, Babylon, Egypt, all the same thing. That is his empire. The Sahara Desert. Remember, Prester John always talked about his desert that was an ocean of desert. Prester John is Sahara. And it says that the Assyrians would be rebuilt and repatriated even before Israel, because Israel did so wickedly. And we see the East Indians in India, Assyria, are coming up now, right? Economically and power-wise, because they were repatriated even before Israel. They've been built back up again before Israel. It's not the people they call the Assyrians. There's the descendancy from the fallen angels, a lot of them in there. And there's a lot of other brown people in those lands too. Dragons of Arabia and also the Carmanians. So when we look at the word karma, I say, hey, karma, what about karma? I looked it up on the map and it's in India. So like I said, this is the land of Shem, all right? And the Carmanians, it's a place in New Delhi, which is the capital of India, all right? Carmania, all right? So it's spelled differently with a K here. Carmania is a place in the region of Bihar, India. Here are some images of the land, Bam Fortress, etc. Kerman Province. Let's go ahead and look this up. Got that from Wikipedia. And now we talked about before how in India there was, at the edge of it, this place on the rock of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is just off India because it seems like it broke off in some kind of catastrophe, right? But in Sri Lanka is this cave temples of the lion. Now this could be a dragon or a tiger, or it could be a lion, because there were these images of this lion around as well. And so that could be Lion of Judah. That's also who the Iranians are known to be. They're known to be rams, but it is definitely a Hebrew or Shemitic symbol. And remember in the video with that about the Hamites, we went into this, that building, there used to be this huge empire up there, this huge structure and kingdom. You can see all this terraced land, and there were all these great waterfalls and everything that were an obstruction to make your way finally up to the kingdom. It was a strategic point for war. It was a huge kingdom, and it's claimed by the East Indians, and of course, worshiping their gods. But we find out the architect was Maya Sura. So we know Asura means for Assyrian, and Maya, well, we know the Maya are the Hebrews when they were in the middle land over there between America and Africa, right? And they were called the Maya when Joseph ruled there. They were called the Maya. And so in the Hindu scriptures, they have the Maya Sura. So these are the Assyrians. And so this was a famous architect. So this guy was very likely a Hebrew, and there's a bit more evidence on it. So we see again that it's Assyria, Sumerian, Ashur. So that is Assyria. Okay. Now they geographically show it as being different, but when you look at the words, that the affiliation of this architect was with Asura, and this is in the land of Shem, so it's Assyria. Okay. And of course, Esau, this is an image from 1905. Esau ruling in India or Assyria. Here he is, a black man. Look at his servant is a sister with her head wrap on. And look at his black sheiks with him, right? Black Arabs.
Seen the situation in Ukraine, you've seen how the world is responding. Now let me show you how the world is covering this invasion. I'm talking about the media, especially Western channels. How are they covering Russia's invasion? With blatant racism. But they do not see hardships. They only see race, the color of your skin, the color of your hair. Let me show you exhibit number 1. This exchange happened on the BBC, the so-called Guardian of Unbiased Reportage. Listen to how their panel describes the refugees from Ukraine.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed.
People with blue eyes and blonde hair. That is why the so-called expert on the BBC is emotional, not because the people are homeless, not because their country is being invaded, but because their hair is blonde. On social media, a lot of people are defending the BBC. They say it's a guest, not their anchor. Let me take you back to September last year. Another guest was speaking on the very same channel, South Asian expert Christine Fair. She called out Pakistan's links with the Taliban. Do you remember what the BBC presenter did? She shut her down. She said it was violating the channel's unbiased coverage. Appalled by the war, not because there is death and destruction, but because it is happening in Europe.
Now, like Iraq or Afghanistan, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen, or hope that it's going to happen, or hope that it's going to happen.
Let me show you what Bulgaria's Prime Minister said about refugees. I'm quoting. These people are intelligent. They are educated people. This is not the refugee wave we have been used to. People, we were not sure about their identity. People with unclear pasts who could have been even terrorists. That was a European head of state. He's openly calling West Asian refugees terrorists. If this does not expose Western hypocrisy, nothing does. They invaded Asian and African countries. They waged war. They committed war crimes. And when the people fled, they shut their borders. What does this tell you? That refugees were never the problem. That money or borders were not the issue. The issue was race.
What did I tell you guys? This is the land of Shem. How Negro do these West Asian refugees look? Edomites, Medo-Persians, Assyrians, scrambled for the favor of Israel. The news from their website, Yes Baba, the Indians are clearly showing evidence that they've had a long-time military relationship with Putin and Russia, who has provided them with air defense. They're their number one producer of military weapons. and they've had a long-standing relationship. Currently, their outward-facing PR is saying that India is encouraging Putin to go into peace talks with the Ukraine, but on the hard line, they are military allies. So Jeremiah 51:11 says, also the Lord stirred up the spirit of the kings of the Medes because his purpose is against Babylon to destroy her. The Medes will be used by Yah to destroy Babylon. And then the word says, make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the king of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. That's Jeremiah 51:11 and 51:28. Isaiah 13:17, once again, behold, I will stir up the Medes against him, which shall not regard silver. As for gold, they shall not delight in it. They're not going to take anything but revenge. The kings of the south, the dragons of Arabia. So let's get into the Black Arabs now. And this would be the first carpenter after the fall of the temple. And so this is the land. And of course, you know that I believe that this is the head of the earth. And so this is Abyssinia. Now, we're always going around about Moors and what does Moor mean, but just here's a reference from Nation Knows No Color Line. And of course, Zondervan Dictionary talks about how the Hamites were the Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites and Egyptians. But of course, we know they mixed in with Israel and they settled at the front of the Nile. All right. And that was because they were scattered also, and their land was broken up and destroyed due to judgment. And so how did they look? Because everyone thinks that, you know, over there in that land, that the Arabs are white people with white skin. Here's just some highlights here. Niger means black. Niger, black. It's the surname of Simeon, one of the 5 prophets and teachers of the church at Antioch, who were led of Yahuwah to send forth Paul and Barnabas, probably a Hebrew Christian from North Africa. So it is associated with black skin, all right? And then it says of the black Moors and the Arabs, so predominant was black skin of the Moorish invaders of Europe that the blackamoor, black as Moor, came to be used not only for the Moroccans, but for other blacks as Ethiopian and Sudanese. As Elliot Smith says, the Negro admixture is so evident among the Moroccans. So when you're talking about blackamoors, all right, Negroes, they are black people. So the real Arabs are black. The original Arabs are black, all right? Handley, a more recent writer, says, in physique, a Moor may be a Berber or an Arab or a mixture of the two with Negro blood as well, all right? So talking about the Negroes. Says many American Negroes are indistinguishable from Arabs. That's the report of a meeting between President Roosevelt and King Ibn Saud, okay? And King Ibn Saud is actually a descendant of the Rothschilds. Okay, so let's get into the Arab slave trade, because we know that Joseph was sold to the Egyptians, and the Arab slave trade has been a very powerful slave trade. All right, it continues to this day. And all right, and so these are the white Arabs who took over from the black Arabs in enslaving the whole world. But first it started, of course, with the original Arabs who were black Arabs. You know, as we're learning more and more now, there was a conflation, in other words, a confusion and mixing of the identity of the Moors and the Jews, because it became taboo to call yourself Hebrew or Yahudim because you would be persecuted or killed. So they started calling themselves Moors, and Edom was calling themselves Moors. But it's actually the Moors who enslaved. When they talk about slavery in West Africa or even coming out of Europe, if you're talking about slavery, you're talking about the Edomites, the Arab Edomites, and the Arab Africans, the Arab Muslims enslaving the Israelites and even force converting them to become Muslims and then sharing and taking on their identity. Again, this is the Umayyad dynasty, and they were a Bantu dynasty who were West Africans. So they were Shemites, and they helped the Arabs to conquer Western Europe because the 10 tribes had lost the North African and Western European territories that belonged to Shem. And there is no northern border for the land of Abraham. It goes all the way from the Ethiopic Sea, which is the Egyptian Sea, according to Jubilees, and then all the way to Euphrates. There's no northern border and there's no southern border. In fact, it goes all the way to the tongue of the sea. So that means it goes all the way to the Rubus Negro. So that was their territory. And they lost it when they had their scattering. And so Judah and the remaining tribes that were scattered had to fight to get it back, because when the temple fell and even Rome was broken down by the Goths and everything, they began to take those lands over because Israel was scattered, okay? Scattered into the west and scattered deep into Africa. We've already gone over this, but go ahead and read through some of it if you want. All right, so we're going to talk about this guy, Ayub, but what we want to say is that the Turkic people, the Russian horde, or the Ottomans, were descended from the Tamans, from Taman, who was one of the sons of Esau, okay? And they are so associated with Job, Ayub, son of Esau, in the land of Esau. So Job went through his trial in Uz or Oz, all right? And his name was Ayub or Job, all right? And these are associated later with the Oz, Oghuz, Kangan, with the Mongolians, okay? So we went over this history in Prester John, but I just want you to see the Ottoman Sultan's primacy among the Turkish monarchs, all right? So they were above them because these were the real Edomites. These are the Edomites who typically ran down and captured Israel in West Africa. So Job was also an Edomite. Job was the one who had the trial of his life, lost his entire family, and then Yah gave his family back to him. So this is actually, if you're Khazarian or an Edomite, this is the trial of your life. You have to leave your entire family to join Israel, and your family will be given back to you. Okay, so this is not to discriminate against those who have a heart for Yah, which was the real promise that Yah had also given to Esau as a possibility for his life. Here is the areas where the Nigerians are and where Edom is, and this is a particular Edomite, Ayuba or Solomon Diallo, or Job Solomon Diallo, and of course Job, some speculate that he was actually an Edomite. This gentleman was a Muslim, and he captured and enslaved the Hebrews coming out of these areas in Nigeria. And you can also see, here's another map of Edom. And this again is in the same region where we saw the map of Africa and the Hebrews. Because they would sell to the Europeans. The Europeans could not handle the mosquitoes. They could not handle the malaria or the heat. So this is the work that the Black Edomites did in Africa. And this particular guy was an Arab Edomite slave stealer trader who was captured by the Yahudim after capturing a whole bunch of Hebrews and selling them into slavery. And then he was sold to the very trader he had just sold all the Hebrews to. And then he was taken to America. He begged him beforehand, the white slave trader. And so he pleaded with the guy and he said, look, I just sold you a bunch of slaves, but his beard had been shaved off and his hair had been shaved off as well. So he said, well, contact your people, send for them, and if they come get you, I'll free you. But he was sent to America. And then when he arrived there soon after, he was freed and sent back to, and celebrated and sent back. The Arab slave trade was a combination of both enslaving Israel, and then when the Gentiles took over and they took on the identity even of the Arabs, like the Ottomans through the line of Esau, they also enslaved. So white people are enslaved, black people are enslaved, but of course, more Black people were enslaved than anybody else because they're Israel. And so they're the most persecuted people in the world due to the punishment from Yah. Okay? So this is from howafrica.com, 10 facts about the Arab enslavement of Black people not taught in schools. Okay, so this is not going to be pleasant, guys. So please brace yourselves. The number of people enslaved by the Muslims has been hotly debated. Now, of course, because they want to deny the persecution of Israel. Some historians estimate between AD 650 and 1900, 10 million to 20 million people were enslaved by Arab slave traders. Others believe it was 20 million. And so the legacy of Arab Islam in Africa estimates that over 80 million more Black people died over that route. The Arab slave trade typically dealt in the sale of castrated male slaves and Black boys between the age of 8 and 12. So Israelite boys between 8 and 12 had their members completely amputated. 6 of every 10 bled to death during the procedure, according to some sources. But the high price brought by eunuchs on the market made the practice profitable. Some men were castrated to be eunuchs in domestic service. And this practice was not only limited to Black males. The Khalifa in Baghdad at the beginning of the 10th century had 7,000 Black eunuchs and 4,000 white eunuchs in his palace, says Ronald Siegel in his 2002 book, Islam's Black Slaves, the Other Black Diaspora. Now, they say Arab is not a racial classification. Well, they have mixed, but originally the first Arabs, as we know, were Blacks because they would be Ishmaelites and they would have been descendants of Abraham, who dwelt in a hot land, a land that was both hot and cold. All of Africa is very hot. And of course, the Egyptians who dwelt in a hot land as well. The land of Ham is hot. And so they were dark-skinned. They were known as Ham was related to people of burnt or dark faces, and they were compared to Ethiopians who cannot change the color of their skin. So they were Black, mixed with Black. Or in the beginning, there was more of a mutual respect between Blacks and the more lighter-skinned Arabs. However, as Islam demanded for enslaved Blacks grew, so did racism towards African. As a casual association with Black skin and slave began to be established, racist attitudes towards Blacks began to manifest in Arab language and literature. The word for slave, abid, became a colloquialism for African. And here's an image of the women being traded as slaves, the African women. Now, this is the Israelites. The Eastern Arab slave trade dealt primarily with African women maintaining a ratio of 2 women to each man. These women and young girls were used by Arabs and other Asians as concubines and menials. A Muslim slaveholder was entitled by law to the sexual enjoyment of his slave women, filling the harems of wealthy Arabs. African women bore them a host of children. The Arab slave trade in the 19th century was economically tied to the European. New opportunities of exploitation were provided by the transatlantic slave trade. This sent Arab slavers into overdrive. The Portuguese on the Swahili coast profited directly and were responsible for the boom in the Arab trade. Meanwhile, on the West African coast, the Portuguese found Muslim merchants entrenched along the African coast as far as the Bight of Benin, and these European enslavers found they could make considerable amounts of gold transporting enslaved Africans from one trading post to another along the Atlantic coast. And the Arab slave trade continues today. Now, I don't want anyone despising the Edomites or the Fulani as you go into this, because the law of Yah says, do not despise your brother Esau. That's a command. But this is just to gain some understanding.
Upon gaining independence from Great Britain in 1916, the newly formed Nigerian Republic was greatly divided as its 3 largest ethnic groups struggled to live in harmony. Beyond the more obvious distinctions of language, clothing, and marriage customs, Nigeria's 3 main ethnic groups also had fundamental differences in values and worldviews, which had been developed over the many centuries leading up to the colonial era and the formation of the Nigerian state. The Igbos, who represented about 60 to 70% of the population of the Southeast, were mostly Christians who in the centuries before the colonial era had lived in relatively egalitarian societies. People's particular appreciation for wealth creation through hard work is undoubtedly the main reason why many of Nigeria's champions of industry have been of Igbo ancestry. By contrast, the majority Muslim Hausa Fulani, which represented about 65% of the northern population, have lived for many years in feudal societies in which large working-class populations were ruled by small theocratic elites composed of emirs and sultans. As their political leaders often doubled as religious leaders, compliance and submission to the will of the political establishment was not simply a civic duty, but a religious one. Very much unlike in Igbo societies, there was nothing particularly odd or shameful about a man aspiring to live a modest life as a farm worker, craftsman, or a nomadic cattle herder. Some studies estimated that as of Nigeria's independence in 1960, northern Nigeria had an English literacy rate of just 2%, compared to the southeast, which had an English literacy rate of 19.2%. The Yorubas, which formed about 75% of Nigeria's southwestern population, were in many ways a sort of halfway house between the Igbos and the Hausa Fulani, both in terms of their religious affiliation and their political history. Although also majority Christian, they nevertheless had significant populations of Muslims as well as followers of the ancient Yoruba religions. In simple terms, the traditional Yoruba political structure was basically less autocratic than the Hausa Fulani, but not as democratic as the Igbo. For centuries, Yoruba societies were ruled by kings known as Obas, who governed in close consultation with chiefs, priests, and priestesses. Culturally, the Yorubas were quite similar to the Igbo in their appreciation for individual drive and ambition. However, the Yorubas tended to channel their energies towards excellence in the arts and academia, as opposed to pure industry and wealth creation. It would be very far from the truth. In reality, most Yoruba societies got on well enough with Igbo societies. The main culture clash, if you like, was between the Hausa Fulanis of the north and a few major ethnic groups of the south. Prior to the colonial era, ancient Yoruba kingdoms such as the Oyo Empire had for many years suffered under several waves of jihadi attacks by the Islamic Sokoto Caliphate of the north, led by the famous Sultan Uthman Dan Fodio. Now, although the Igbos did not have a similar history of warring with the Hausa Fulani, the British colonial enterprise would create the perfect environment for the sharp differences between these two tribes to be brought to the forefront. In 1914, British High Commissioner Frederick Douglass effectively created the country we know today as Nigeria by bringing the northern and southern regions together in the now infamous Nigerian Amalgamation of 1915. To this very day, the feeling amongst many Yoruba and Igbo historians is that one of the main purposes of this amalgamation was to place the more affluent South under the control of the autocratic North. The theory goes that by joining the more educated and therefore less controllable southern region to the much larger northern region, the British government was better able to implement its policy of indirect rule, as the amalgamation essentially gave dominion over the entire country to the northern elites, who were significantly less rebellious and generally more amenable to British interests. It is also worth noting that from 1914 onwards, the British adopted the practice of placing Northerners in key leadership positions within the colonial administration. Despite being generally better educated, Southerners were more often than not limited to managerial and executive roles within the colonial apparatus.
In the year 1969, the 2-year Nigeria-Biafra war killed an estimated 1 to 3 million people, mostly from the Igbo tribe in eastern parts of the country. What's worse, the starvation and the lack of support they were left with afterwards, the Igbo Bantus diaspora. Afterwards, over 10 million people died of starvation, mostly children. And so during that televised war, that's where you would see all these images of starving children in Africa, and then they would capitalize off of the charity for that. That's another. And this was conflict between, again, the Fulani versus the Igbo. This is part of the ongoing conflict between Esau and Jacob, between the Fulani and the Igbos in Africa. How do they maintain slavery today? Oh, well, let me just say one thing, guys. I just want to say this. The Russians in the Biafran War between basically Britain and the Igbo people, and of course the Fulani who sided with the British, Russia had stepped in to help for a minute, but only in a minor way, okay? Only in a minor way did they step in. And then they stepped out, and then all of these people were massacred. So Russia has taken the role. It seems like Hasatan, the enemy, he's a brilliant strategist. And so what he did was he said, okay, I understand that whoever persecutes the people of Israel is going to be cursed and taken out once this repatriation happens. So I'm going to take my Russian agents, I'm going to keep them at a distance. They're not going to enslave any Israelite people after, let's say, late 18th century. And they're going to help, for example, the Cubans, they're going to help the Angolan Black people, they're going to help Black people, so that when this end time second Exodus comes, their hands are going to be relatively clean. But we're going to find out they're not totally clean. And in this case, they could have helped more, but they didn't. They do it in a number of ways. It's as though this were an homage from France and Paris and Fashion Week to the Fulani, who enable them to remain billionaires, who monopolize all of the money in Africa, places like Nigeria. America does it too, but France is the most powerful colonizer in Africa. That's why when you go to France, you have no idea what these people do, because they don't do anything. If you see, the Nigerian leader, Buhari, taking trips off to England, he's going to visit his relatives. He's going to visit his cousins, the Rothschilds, because he is Fulani and he is an Edomite who is, and this is what I always say to Africans, I'm like, you need to look into who the families are who are running your nation, because this is not Black on Black violence. This is the Edomites against Israel. The Fulani and other Edomite tribes go all over West Africa and even to South Africa, taking over farmers' land by feeding their cattle, and it causes desertification because the cattle twist and pull the grass up by the roots, and so it compromises farms and the land and farmers. And then the farmers wind up losing money, losing their whole family. Their family gets split up and their children end up wandering the streets, because the Islamic government does nothing to protect the farmers. Counter this, propaganda from the Daily Mail shows them as the most endangered people and this oppressed people. However, they're participating in all of this capitalization of the land as sort of a quiet part of it. We have articles that state that most of the Muslims, as I said before as I've been talking here, it says that most of these Muslims are Fulani. But amidst the Fulani are, of course, Hebrews and Ishmaelites who have mixed in with them and whose nations are somewhat integrated with them, although they do keep a degree of separation. But there is a problem with children of these other nations just wandering the street because they have no economic means of survival. And so there's all these young Al-Majri children or Al-Majri boys wandering the street, descendants of Ishmael and Israel. And it's quite an issue in the land. The Al-Majri children are children who wander the streets begging for food under the guise of being potential Islamic students under some imam, and the imams usually exploit them. The Al-Majri grows up in the streets without love, care, or guidance of parents. His struggle for survival exposes him to abuse, homosexuality, and pedophilia, used as a slave and brainwashed and recruited for antisocial activities and used for destructive and violent activities. This is the picture of the painful plight of the Al-Majri boys. And they say that they could be sitting on a ticking time bomb that could be worse than the endemic terrorism Boko Haram currently inflicts on them. So implying that these children can be made into child soldiers. They are abused and they're trafficked and they're molested. And the government doesn't really do anything about it because it's just kind of a free-for-all. The culture is a pedophilic culture. Now, I'm not saying that all Arabic culture is, but to a large extent it is. We've seen in Beast of No Nation that's true. And so this is another way that the Israelites are still being enslaved and trafficked by the Muslims, by the Edomite Fulani, And these are the same people who trafficked Israel in the transatlantic slave trade from Africa over to America. All the officials seem to say is, oh, change is very slow. We're doing what we can. They've been saying that for years. This particular news story speaks of Islamic State of West Africa releasing a video of a child who looked to be around 10 years old executing a Christian man in Borno, Nigeria. And there's even a history of many of them being jailed for months and even years without any hearing, any court proceedings on the grounds that they are this potential military threat. When we look at the history of this, the Nigerian army had imprisoned a lot of child suspects, suspecting that they could possibly be used by Boko Haram as military agents, terrorists, child bombers, that sort of thing. And this became of great concern to Human Rights Watch. And so consequently, the children were released 3 weeks after Human Rights Watch published a report documenting the degrading inhuman conditions in which children have been held at Giwa Barracks. Human Rights Watch found that the children were detained without charge for months or years in squalid and severely overcrowded cells. Children described beatings, overwhelming heat, and frequent hunger. And remember, this is a pedophile culture, and it's Babylonian. That is part of this culture. Edom wears the red crown, and he is the predatory bird. And you'll notice Idris Elba is playing Edom in a lot of movies. Slavery continues all over the continent of Africa, in Libya, Morocco, Yemen. A lot of people are trafficked, and we're even going to touch on the Lord's Liberation Army, etc., because once again, it's the same people, the Edomites. Next, we're going to go into some of the Ethiopians. And as I said before, some of the 10 tribes remained among the Ethiopians, and as well as the descendants of Abraham and Keturah. So I already mentioned that Dan and Manasseh, so children of the half-tribe of Manasseh, dwelt in the land. So some of the tribes, Adali is one of the tribes among the Eritreans. Okay? In Djibouti and Eritrea. This is where the Afar tribe lives. And they are descendants of Manasseh. And some of them are descendants of, this is Judah. And so some of them are descendants of Judah as well as the sons of Midian. All right, and then there's the Oromo tribe, and these are more descendants of Esau. So Anak is one of them. And Dan is also the Danakil. The Danites are also among Danak, Dan brother, all right, are also, the Afar, also known as the Danakil, are part of these Ethiopian tribes. And we read that in the last Prester John video. Go ahead and take a look at it. Right, we already went over this. All right, so the Solomonic dynasty, known as the House of Solomon, was a dynasty of the Ethiopian Empire formed in the 13th century. Its members claim descent from King Solomon, and that the queen gave birth to Menelik after her biblically described visit to Solomon in Jerusalem. Now, the Zagwe dynasty is the dynasty we were just talking about, okay? And those are descendants of Sheba, as well as there's Dan mixed in and Manasseh's mixed in. And also there are members of the Midianites, descendants of Abraham and Keturah mixed in. And so this is a mixed nation of the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But the Zagwe dynasty was overthrown by Yekuno Amlak. So this is Amalek. All right, and that's who who claimed descendancy from Solomon, and that dynasty was Haile Selassie. That's the second Edomite dynasty. And I know people don't like to hear that, but that's what it is. All right. And he does really look like an Edomite. And so here's another one of the Amalehu, another one of what I believe are the true Hebrews among the Eritreans. He looks very Eritrean, not Edomitish at all. And this is his son, his offspring. And he actually went to war with the British. The British didn't support him at all. And they actually, when he got upset about it, they attacked him and killed him. And they took his son captive. And then his son, this guardian, was set over him. And you can see he's clearly a Hun. He's a Gentile. All right, so we're going to move on now to China. And so we're going to make these connections, obviously, back to the Hun and the Gentiles who were Mongoloid race, because they did take over, as I said before in the other videos on Prester John, they usurped the Ethiopians and they started to take the kingdom. As you guys know, I love to show this video because there is a whole power switch back to black going on, and the Pope did remove the title Vicar of Christ from himself. Some people think it's because the Antichrist is here, but there's other reasons. The whole power structure is shifting to the West. These are a number of Sudanese people in northwestern Africa, or northeastern, however you want to say, because everyone's confused about directions. But this is part of that story. So I just thought I would show these people. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to China and the Hun. So like I said, the Roman kingdom was divided into 10 tribes. 10 tribes, all right, around between 190 AD and 476 AD. The Romans were removed by the Goths, okay? And this was, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, and its teeth were of iron, devouring and crushing to atoms, and it trampled the remainder of its feet. And it was all together different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So this is the emergence of the 10 horns. All right, and this comes from Tartaria and from the Mongoloids, who then morph into the Hebrew nations. All right, and take over the identity. So, and as I've said before, this is when there is all this mixing that goes on. But it's actually at the command of Yah. So if we look at, I've quoted this before, and this is from the Septuagint, Jeremiah 31, 27 to 30. And behold, the days will come, saith Yahuwah, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Yehudah with the seed of man and the seed of beast, because they are the seed of Satan, who is the beast. But then Daniel says, and whereas thou saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So this, I believe, is about transhumanism more so, and all their weird genetic mutations, but also there's something to be said, because Yah does say, every seed that I have not planted will be uprooted. It has to be of his direction. And so these are all the groups, the fallen angel groups, the Suevi, the Visigoths, the Scythians, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Burgundians. They become the German, Swiss, French, Italians, Portuguese, people of the Netherlands. They go into all the lands of Shem and take over their identities. And these are the Shiite dynasties of Asia. And see, this is what Menelik, all right, the line of Menelik became when mixed in with the Huns, so mixed in with the Chinese, Asian, Mongoloids, all right? We talked about this in the last Prester John video. And this was the last Menelik. All right, he's old here, so he's looking kind of faded out. But that's his descendancy among the Mongoloids. This was also a Menelik. So Prester John, and this kingdom most probably identifies as the medieval Russia or the horde known as the Great Mongolian Empire, according to medieval tradition. Prester John belonged to a very old genus and was really a descendant of the Magi, right? So that's the Assyrians, that is the Shemites, the Medo-Persians, or the Persians, I guess. And it is possible that the tribes of his subjects were the same as the infidel Turks of Benjamin of Toluja. All right, and so this is what they call themselves, Twedros. Like even today, the Ethiopian head of the WHO calls himself, his last name's Tudors, right? So they took on this identity confusion by mixing. But the Hebrew word for Ishaba is actually Abba's wife. And so that, I believe, was part of the land of Israel before, but now this becomes Abyssinia. So Sino is sin of Yah. This is the abyss. Tartarus descends into the abyss at the center of the earth where the indrawing seas are. And of course, they have all these lands that go deep into the earth. And of course, Sino is Canaan, and Sino is associated with sin. All right, and so this was the switch in this Prester John the legend and its sources. Genghis Khan was serving one of the descendants of Prester John, and he worked very hard serving him as a vassal, and their nation paid tribute. And this is after the king Yelu. There was a king Yelu first who conquered all the land, and he conquered all the Arabs. And then up came the Hun, and the Hun paid tribute to him. Yelu Dashi or Yelu Tashi had defeated all of the Islamists in the area of Tartaria all the way to Ethiopia. And he had a great empire, and the Arabs really respected him even in their defeat. He gave birth to a son who was the next Prester, and this Prester gets into it with the Huns. The Chinese distinguish and separate themselves from the Mongols, but nonetheless, the Canaanites are the root of the Mongols. So the conflict between Prester and the Tartarian Huns begins when Prester is being given a tax of one animal for every 10. And the Tartars and Huns multiplied greatly. And when Prester saw that they were such great people, he said to them that they could harm him, and said that it would be wise to disperse them throughout many lands. So he sent one of his barons to do that, and the Tartars heard what Prester John wanted to do to them, and they became sad, and they all departed together and headed for the desert towards the north, where Prester John could not harm them, and they rejoiced because they no longer had to pay taxes to him. Then they multiplied to become such a great multitude of Tartars that it was marvelous to them. And when Genghis Khan saw that he had such a great people, he prepared them with bow and other weapons and went conquering throughout certain other regions. And they conquered 8 provinces, okay? So next, he then, skipping down second paragraph, sent messengers to Prester John, and this was the year 1200. And he sent word to him that he wanted the Prester to give him his daughter as a wife. And when Prester John heard that Genghis Khan offered him to give his daughter as a wife, he was greatly outraged. So he rejects this whole idea because, it's a different seed and everything. And he threatens to kill him and says he's a vassal. So then when Genghis Khan heard about the great dishonor Prester John had done him, he was inflamed. So anyway, they wind up going to war with each other. 2 days later, both sides armed themselves and fought each other, and the battle was so great that its like has never seen before. Heavy losses were sustained on both sides, but in the end, Genghis Khan won the battle, and in this battle, Prester John was killed. And from that day, Genghis Khan was constantly attacking that land which he held before he died. And I say to you that Genghis reigned for 6 years after this battle and conquered many castles and many provinces. But at the end of these 6 years, he went to a castle and he was wounded in his knee. But what happens is that he takes the daughter of Prester John, and then they begin to mix in with her. Okay, China, Ukraine, and the Huns. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, Seir was a mountain range south of the Dead Sea. Okay, so the geography, we don't know. All right, but I believe that Mount Seir was probably in the Caucasus Mountains. That's why they're so highlighted, the Caucasus Mountains. Or possibly, the Swiss Alps, either one of those two. But thus Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau's Edom. Therefore, the Jews today admit that the Khazar Jews are from Esau. Okay? So now I'm not talking about everyday people. I'm talking about the people running these establishments who are in the know about all the secrets, okay? The architects, the master builders, the masons, right? They run everything. They know everything. Though most of the modern Jews of today claim to have come from the tribe of Judah, they are really a hybrid of people consisting of the Edomites, Canaanites, Jaduhite, Babylonians, Huns, Khazars, Slavs, and such. Hence, the majority of the world's Jewish people, as we know them today, are a mixture of the blood of Israel, Edom, Khazaria, and other nations. Arthur Koestler had record of a letter by a Khazar king who traced his genealogy back to Japheth's son, Togarmah, the ancestor of all Turkish tribes. Okay, and so that was King Bulan. Okay, and even his name, Baal, it's Baalan. He's a Baalan. All right, so he's worshiping Baal. The Jews in Europe, the Khazar government was destroyed by Russia in 1016 AD, and their land later invaded by the hordes of Genghis Khan around 1200 AD. The European banking conglomeration was started by a Jew named Amschel Moses Myers, who later changed his name to Rothschild. So that is the Rothschild origins. And now we're just going to go a little bit more into this mixture between the Huns. So a Hun is a Japheth and Canaan mix, okay? And then we'll get into the Khazars. All right, so Bantu Khan. There was a Khan named Batu. This is not Bantu, but Batu Khan. He was known as Tsar Batu in Russian historiography, and he was the Mongol ruler of the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire. And he was the grandson of Genghis Khan, who we just talked about. And he ruled over Kiev and Rus, Volga, Bulgaria. Okay, and the Caucasus for around 250 years. So there he is, and see, very Asian looking. And this is what the scripture says. These are the people who came. Thus saith Yehudah, behold, the people comes from the north, nations shall be stirred up from the end of the earth, and they shall lay hold on the bow and the spear. The people is fierce, and they will have no mercy, and their voices as the roaring of the sea, and they shall array themselves for war against thee, aspire on horses and chariots, O daughter of Zion. Far out of the north there cometh a nation up against her, which shall make her land desolate, and none shall dwell therein, and they shall remove, and they shall depart, both man and beast. And we saw that there was that somewhat happened with him, Genghis Khan. So let's go into some history. I'm not going to mention the Bangtan conference where all the people of color tried to get together, because China just wound up signing with America and Europe and Russia. Darfur and the Sudan are areas that, politically China kind of remains silent on, as well as Russia. The Darfur genocide refers to current mass slaughter and rape of Darfur men, women, and children in Western Sudan. And the killings began in 2003 as the first genocide of the 21st century. It's carried out by a group of government-armed, funded Arab militias known as the Janjaweed, which loosely translates as devils on horseback. Now, I don't know a lot about this. I've seen some documentaries on it. I'm by no means an expert on this, but the word was always that the weapons were coming from the Russians and the financing from the Chinese, and a lot of ivory was taken out of these areas and taken to China. So the Sudan is the largest country in Africa. You can see by this map here, and see it's right next door to Israel. And one of the figures moving around there whose influence seems to have died down is Joseph Kony of the Lord's Resistance Army, who's been practicing in more the southern region a lot of violence against men and women and children, and setting up these armies of children and sending them through this extreme trauma and child sex slavery, and forcing children to participate in hostilities was something that Kony was known to have practiced. And now the word is that he's no longer really a threat. He's kind of died down. Well, the typical strategy of any of the conquerors who's ever come into Africa is to cause two groups of people to fight, to overarm one side over the other, to favor one group over the other, and create dissension so the area could be conquered by the West. That's what America typically has. It practices dollar imperialism where it does that. It doesn't actually go in, but it keeps the nations destabilized so that it can just set up puppet governments and drain the money, as I said before. So, but they now say that this man is no longer a threat. And like I said, China just does not wish to comment at any time on what's been going on in those regions for political reasons. And because it's so close to, Israel and right near Nigeria, and China has been with Nigeria and the oil industry for a very long time. So the main resource that was discovered in the Sudan was oil. So if we look here, following independence from Britain in 1956, the Sudan became embroiled in two prolonged civil wars. For the remainder of the 20th century, conflicts were rooted in northern economic, political, and social domination of largely non-Muslim, non-Arab Southern Sudanese. So these people are Christians. And the Civil War ended in 1972, but broke out again in 83. There were more than 2 million deaths over 2 decades as the Civil War between North and South reached its peak in the 1990s. The government ignored the reports of rising violence in Darfur, while the comprehensive peace agreement ended in the North-South War in 2005. Granting additional political power to South Sudan, it failed to take into account the effects of the war on Darfur. Darfur remained underdeveloped and marginalized at the federal level, lacking infrastructure and development assistance. This neglect, combined with allegations that the government was arming Arab tribesmen to raid non-Arab villages, was cited as the justification for a February 2003 rebel attack on a Sudanese Air Force base in El Fasher, North Darfur. Long and the short of it is, let's come down to China and Russia. Both China and Russia have worked to block many United Nations resolutions in attempts to appease the Sudanese government from its seat in the United Nations Security Council. China has been the Sudan's chief diplomatic ally. China invests heavily in Sudanese oil. The country is China's largest overseas oil provider. So that's been for a very long time. And the Sudan's military is supplied by Chinese-made helicopters, tanks, fighter planes, bombers, rocket launchers, propelled grenades, and machine guns. For decades, Russia and China have maintained a strong economic and politically strategic partnership. The countries oppose UN peacekeeping troops in the Sudan. Russia strongly supports Sudan's territorial integrity and opposes the creation of an independent Darfuri state. Also, Russia is Sudan's strongest investment partner and political ally in Europe. Russia considers Sudan an important global ally in the African continent. So, okay, guys, so it's very clear here that the Arabs are being used against the Israelites in this scenario. But it's very clear, as I also showed you, that now the Sudanese are taking on this pope role. The papacy, I believe, and I suspect from that image that I showed you of the Pope coming and kissing all their feet and everything, I believe that it's part of the global reset, the switch. But you can see how the Arabs are used against all of these so-called Christians who were really Israelites to destabilize the area, to rob them, to prostitute them, and to reduce them to nothing, all right? And part of that was the role that China and Russia played in that. So their hands are not so clean. However, in relation to the UN, they've kept the UN out of those areas. But again, this is a narrative. It's a narrative. So you see how the destabilization has benefited Russia and China there. It recently constructed the African Union building with billions, and of course making the Africans responsible for the cost of the loans and hiring Chinese workers to build it, were found out to be spying on Africans and officials in the AU using technology and software within the building. And they're also very famous for their train that goes nowhere and for building roads that fall apart in monsoon rains. So a lot of what they do and they loan money for becomes nothing. And it's all sort of a conspiracy to obtain property. Said these men tried to bribe the Nigerian government, but obviously this kind of thing has been going on for a very long time. This is being used as leverage against the Chinese for Nigeria to get their country back. However, let's take a look at the real process that's been happening with the corrupt government.
You know that the loan that China is paying, they cargoed it, meaning ship arrived with the money in containers. Why do you do that? Only in Nigeria that they say a loan that was collected by the federal government had to come in a ship. Okay, do you know that the loan from IMF was what these Khazars people, I told you, they have all they think of is to chop money and to kill, just like an alligator. How can you come down to the level of corruption that you say loan in these days of digital banking, in these days of electronic banking, in these days of banking in which it's just wireless? They insist, say, make that money come in cash, land for Lagos Wharf. And so you're surprised when I say that they follow, that is impunity. Remember, the title of my show today is Terrorism, Loans, and Impunity. They say that is, they don't fear people anymore. Make it arrive in container where we collect our share. Do you know how much of that money gets lost in the process? Loan money. How can you have there's no, Nigeria, the worst thing in history, money coming in container. When I heard it, my spirit left me. I called someone, I said, it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. Jesus, it's a lie. They confirmed it for me. They said, yes, that day, will army fool the wharf. That day, military presence in the wharf was beyond understanding because the money was arriving in a ship. The money was arriving in a ship. Military presence, full wharf on different loads that are arriving at the wharf, not through wireless. This thing will become a part of Biafra for one reason, and that is to save the world from terrorism, because the Fulanis are all thinking of how they could make the whole of Nigeria Sharia land. The pressure is the whole of northern Nigeria is Sharia, the whole of southern is Christian. If you've read the Quran, you will understand that this is an abnormality in their eyes. They're not supposed to be under us. The Quran forbids it, that they should be under us. Like Muslim be vice president, Christian be president. It forbids that. It forbids that they should ever even work with us because we're unbelievers, we're infidels. Foreign banks have eaten trillions of dollars from African money. Not the actual African, just using it to do their investments, using it to trade on it. Because wait, I told you the story. The other day that Trump released the name of all the Nigerian guys that have their money is in billion in American banks. It's in billion. And I remember how I told you how the trade world works. $1 million deposits gives you permission to do $1 billion trades. $1 billion deposits give you permission to do $1 billion trades. So when someone puts in that kind of money, then he ignores it for 8 years because he doesn't want EFCC to catch him. And he leaves it there till people forget he even stole it, then he can go and touch it. Do you know how much money foreigners have made from that your money? And they trade daily. They don't trade in years. They trade daily. They made trillions of dollars.
Last year in Nigeria.
Okay, so I want to just say this was kind of
you're going to see by the military installments, we're going to go into the military installments, that a lot of this land has the American government in it, and it had France in it. So this was clearly a tactic to give China a bad look, put egg on their face, and make it look like they were participating in this corruption, when this is what the French and the Americans and the British have been doing the whole time. That's why there's all this money. You can look up these lists and you'll find out there's all these Nigerian leaders with billions of dollars in bank accounts in America. And then the Americans profit off of all the interest, and the Africans have to pay the loans. All right, so that's how it works. But this was just a case where they decided to put China's face on it because the Chinese were trying to do business with them. But it's still a stronghold of the West, Nigeria. It's still a stronghold of Britain and France and America. They did move France out a bit, but you know, they just switched the players. So now they have America there. So when we see the American bases, we're going to see that the Europeans and everything are still there. But nonetheless, the process is the same. This is how they steal the money from Africa and say, oh, those Africans just don't know how to handle their money. No, it's a complete scam. Okay, so now this is the Lekki tollgate massacre, where all of those, it was like hundreds and hundreds of people were massacred at this tollgate. They say it was like 6. But anyway, so this is the sort of final installment of how the Igbo are persecuted in Nigeria, and how this ties into China, etc. During the epidemic, there were all these reports of shootings and mass killings, and of the police in Nigeria going into people's houses and rounding them up and killing them. Or if there was a successful young businessman or ambitious young man in the southern states of Nigeria, they would be killed or have everything stolen from them or be put in jail. And I'll put a link to some of my videos that go into all of this and validate the Nigerians as Hebrews. But so there was this false flag SARS event at Lekki Tollgate, where all of these people were massacred at night as they headed towards the tollgate, and they were just shot by bullets because they were supposedly protesting the fact that they were on lockdown. And they used a lot of celebrities to talk about the event, the usual formula. And of course, they discovered that the Nigerian police had been trained by the United Kingdom over all these years. So it was a proxy way, again, of controlling and maintaining police force in Nigeria over the southern Hebrew tribes. Okay, and this continues today. Right, so here is the prophecy to Asia, and this is how we know Asia is one of the carpenters. Once we talk about the Tartars and the Khazars and everything a little bit more with Japheth, then we are going to see how the two come together and with the ruling powers today. All right, and they shall go steadfastly unto Babylon and make her afraid. This is 2 Esdras 15. So this is Asia invading Babylon, all right, as a carpenter. They shall go steadfastly unto Babylon and make her afraid, and they shall come to her and besiege her. The star and all the wrath shall they pour out upon her. Then shall the dust and smoke go up to heaven, and they that be about her shall bewail her, and they that remain under her shall do service unto them that put her in fear. And thou, Asia, thou partaker of the hope of Babylon, and art the glory of her person, woe be unto thee, thou wretch, because thou hast made thyself like unto her, and hast decked thy daughters in whoredom, that they might please and glory in thy lovers, which have always desired to commit whoredom with thee. Thou hast followed her that is hated in all her works and inventions. Therefore, saith Yahuwah, I will send plagues upon thee, widowhood, poverty, famine, sword, pestilence, to waste thy houses with destruction and death. And the agony of thy power shall be dried up as a flower, and the heat shall rise that is set over thee. And thou shalt be weakened as a poor woman with stripes, as one chastised with wounds, so that the mighty and lovers shall not be able to receive thee. Would I with jealousy have so proceeded against thee, saith the Lord? Trick out the beauty of thy face. That's really what it's the translation is. This translation's different. If thou had not always slain my chosen, exalting the stroke of thy hands and saying over their dead when thou wast drunk, and set forth the beauty of thy countenance. In other words, check out the beauty of thy face. The reward of thy whoredom shall be in thy bosom, and therefore shalt thou receive recompense. Like as thou hast done to my chosen, saith Yahuwah, even so shall Yahuwah do unto thee, and shall deliver thee into mischief. Thy children shall die of hunger, and thou shalt fall through the sword. Thy city shall be broken down, and all thine shall perish with the sword in the field. They that be in the mountains shall die of hunger, and eat their own flesh, and drink their own blood, for the very hunger of bread and thirst of water. Thou, as unhappy, shall come through the sea and receive plagues again. And in the passage they shall rush on the idol city and destroy the portion of their land and consume part of their glory, and shall return to Babylon that was destroyed. So an army is going to come against China. And thou shalt be cast down by them as stubble, and they shall be unto thee as fire, and shall consume thee and thy cities and thy land and thy mountains, and all the woods and all thy fruitful trees shall they burn up with fire, and thy children shall they carry away captive, and look what thou hast. They shall spoil it and mar the beauty of thy face. Oh, poor Asia. Anyway, so that's Asia. And so now we'll go on to Russia. And so I have Iran and Russia here because they're both symbolized by the bear. And that was the second empire to take the Medo-Persians, as I said before, was Cyrus. Russians originally, a lot of them were black. They were black Russians, okay? And very likely the original Russians were probably a little browner, right? Because this was not the fallen angel seed. But nonetheless, Esau went up in there. And we know that they are associated with Rusadan, the Sudonians, all right? And so that can be the Sudanese and the Sudonians. And the Zidonians oppressed the 10 tribes of Asher. Soon the Zidonians were oppressing the Israelites in the promised land. Sidon or Sadia probably meant fishery or fishing town, etc. All right. And there was a queen of Georgia known as Rusadan, tied to the Sidonians or the Sadia. All right. The descendants of the biblical and Israelites. We kind of touched on this a bit. Israeli Jews consist of two groups. Ashkenazi Sephardim, 10 to 20% are known as Sephardim or Eastern Jew. The remaining 80 to 90% are Ashkenazi or European Jew. The Ashkenazi Jew comes from the Eastern European countries. The Sephardim come from Mid-East countries. So those are probably darker Edomites, right? And Danites, right? And I think Naphtali was there also. Let history show us who the Khazars and Sephardim are. In the year 450 AD, one of Europe's barbaric tribes was beginning to show signs of restlessness. This tribe was called the Khazars. Within the next 200 years, the Khazars would form Eastern Europe's largest, most powerful kingdom. They would rule about 200 years, ranking in power with the Muslim Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire. Their kingdom of approximately 1 million square miles bordered the Aral Sea on the east, Kiev, and the Ukrainian steppes on the west. Now, that is not the land of Japheth, that's the land of Shem. Where the Ukraine is, that's the land of Shem, and Poland and everything. The Caucasus Mountain and the Black Sea on the south, and the Ural Mountain on the north. Khazaria represented an important period in the European history. Without their valor, Europe would have probably been 100% Muslim today. Why don't we hear more about the Khazars and their mighty empire today? Well, let's look at the genealogy of the Khazars. Since the matter is so important, we shall allow the Kagan or king of the Khazars to inform us. So a Khazar king named Joseph corresponded with Spanish Israelite named Hasdai ibn Sharprut. sometime between 954 and 961 CE. All right, the manuscripts of this correspondence are in the library of Christ Church at Oxford, England, in the Leningrad Public Library in Leningrad, Russia. And so in both of those libraries, Hasdai was the chief minister of the Caliph of Cordoba, Abid al-Rahman III. Okay, that sounds like a very Arabic name, Caliph. Rahman, that sounds like kind of Asian and East Indian. Ra, sun god. At the time, Cordoba was the splendor of Moor Spain, a mixture of black-skinned Muslims and Israelites, the main center of European culture. In his letter to Hasdai, King Joseph stated that he was from the line of Japheth, from the scene of Togarmah, Japheth's grandson. He further stated that Togarmah, who was the brother of Ashkenaz, had 10 sons, and the Khazars represented the 7th son. With his own lips, this king had given the root of his being and the lineage of his offspring, which was from the sons of Japheth. Stay tuned, guys, because we're going to show you how this is all lining up prophetically. So, according to Invention of the Jewish People, page 223, regarding the authenticity of these letters that were received about this conversion, what is said by King, son of Aaron, the Khazar priest. Now, this sharp scholar who detested fables became convinced, and he admitted as much, that the Khazars proselytized and had proselyte kings. I have heard that all this is written in the books of the Ishmaelites, who were living then and wrote about it in their books. He therefore copied the letter of the king, Joseph, and quoted a part of it in his own work. So this is a Khazar priest, supposed descendant of Aaron. Then page 224, the Khazars were a coalition of strong Turkic Hunnic Bulgar clans who, as they began to settle down, mingled with the Scythians, who had inhabited these mountains and steppes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which was known for a long time as the Khazar Sea. Okay, and the Scythians are some of those fallen angel seed. At its peak, the kingdom encompassed an assortment of tribes and linguistic groups, Alans and Bulgars and Magyars and Slavs. The Khazars collected taxes from them and ruled over a vast landmass stretching from Kiev, which is in the Ukraine, northwest to the Crimean Peninsula, into the south from Upper Volga to present-day Georgia. I'm saying this to say that the enemy has players on both sides of the color scheme. And what Black Esau wants you to do is believe that all of the Edomites are white. And what white Esau wants you to believe is that Israel is white. So anyway, you just have to be wise. The true seed of Israel is the Adamic seed, which is made in the image of Yah, and the first Adam, which is what Israel looks like, people of the transatlantic slave trade. But there are people of all kinds who are saved. Continuing with the book, the ruler of Khazaria maintained extensive relations with the Byzantine Empire. The future Emperor Justinian, who had been exiled to Crimea, escaped at the end of the 7th century to the Khazar kingdom, where he married a Khazar princess. She was rebaptized as Theodora, and would later be a powerful empress. Nor was this the only marital tie between the realms. The 10th century ruler and author Constantine VII, I think, wrote that Emperor, I'm not even butchering that name, Emperor Leo allied himself by marriage with the Kagan of Khazaria, accepting his daughter as wife for his son Constantine V, shaming the Byzantine Empire and himself because he thereby abandoned the precepts of the forefathers and treated them with disdain. So they're basically saying that they did marry in with this group of people, and it was considered to be against Torah or the law, right? But nonetheless, they did. And then here is Leo III they're talking about, and he is an Isaurian, also known as the Syrian, by Byzantine emperor from 1717 until his death in 1741, and the founder of the Isaurian dynasty. He put an end to 20 years anarchy, a period of great instability in the Byzantine Empire. So he's an Edomite, clearly, right? So you see Esau mixing with the Khazarians very clearly. Boy, you know, this is, if you check out in Israel, all the Jewish people really have all of this behind the scenes stuff they're doing with Wikipedia and everything. They have a military op in Israel that deals with that. And they have laced the whole internet with Esau and Edom. It's clear, like it's everywhere. So they're definitely fighting. Anyway, so gonna go into this again. What color was Ramses' hair? This is the whole genealogy of Amalek that is connected to Ramses and Seti and all of that. And they are all descended from Eliphaz and his wife Timnah, who was the offspring of Ada, and Esau had 4 Hittite wives, and Ada was the 3rd that Eliphaz came from. He married Timnah, and that's where Duke Amalek came from. So Amalek was a great enemy of Israel, and I believe that it's either that or the Horites that the Rothschilds come from. And so when we look at this, it says, yeah. So Amalek was from Mount Seir, and this is where the red-haired trait comes from. And these are the seasons that the fallen angels were ruling in place, like in empires like Egypt. They eventually work their way to the top, right, in any empire. All right, Arthur Koestler's 13th tribe, continuing. The Montefiores, the Lusadas, Montagues, Avigdors, Sutros, and Sassoons can claim no pure racial origin than the Ashkenazis. We are told, for example, that a certain Judah ben Ezekiel opposed his son marrying a woman who was not the seed of Abraham, whereupon his friend Uthla remarked, how do we know for certain that we ourselves are not descended from the heathens who violated the maidens of Zion at the siege of Jerusalem? Okay, and these are raping people, okay? Because we know that Sarah and Rebecca were just taken by the Egyptian kings, but also I think it was Amalek king, right? Amalekite king. And Dinah was just taken by the king of Shechem. And Yalidashi's granddaughter was just taken by Genghis Khan. And so have been the women of the transatlantic slave trade. All right, so the seed of the woman is at enmity with the seed of the serpent, right, as Genesis says. It is indeed the crucial point in the anthropology of the Jews. We find in Asia Minor, Syria, and Palestine at that time many races. The Amorites, who were blondes, dolichocephalic and tall. The Hittites, a dark complexioned race, probably of Mongoloid type. For the Lord hath caused the army of the Armenians to hear a sound of chariots and a sound of horses, even the sound of the great army, so that they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. So these are these nations coming against Israel. It says the Amorites were blonde and dolichocephalic. Now the head shape for Israel is dolichocephalic. So I don't know, but the blonde thing is probably close to the angel thing. And then the Hittites, a dark complexion race. That's kind of interesting. Because even if you look at the Australians, they look like they're a dark complexion fallen angel seed. Even though they're black like midnight, they've got that very Neanderthal bone structure. Oh yes, I wanted to add this. There's an ancient tradition among the Germanics, and they would go and get the Sabian women, and they would go to get the Jewish women. And according to this tradition, a German unit, the Bangioni, who fought with the Roman legions in Palestine, had chosen from the vast horde of Jewish prisoners the most beautiful women and had brought them back to their stations on the shores of the Rhine and the Main and had compelled them to minister to the satisfaction of their desires. The children thus begotten of the Jewish and German parents were brought up by their mothers in the Jewish faith, their fathers not troubling themselves about them. It is these children who are said to have been the founders of the first Jewish communities between Worms and Mayence. Okay, so that's from the 13th tribe. And so I thought I'd show you this. This guy, now you see TV's John Pounders. He has admitted that he's a descendant of Albert Pike. So he has now UCTV. And of course, this is him here. And there's Albert Pike. And so, you know, the KKK origins are not just from, you know, Japheth, for example. They were coming from the fallen angels, and they're coming from Esau Edom, who was originally black. Okay, and he's mixed in with everyone else, but he's still got his black players in the game. In Britain in October of 1865 in Pulaski, Albert Pike in Nathan Bedford was chosen or hired by a Rothschild agent, a man by the name of Judah Philip Benjamin, who was also a pedophile, to create the KKK. This is the Rothschilds family, okay? Judah Philip Benjamin was the Secretary of State in war for the Confederacy. It was in Nashville that Albert Pike and other Confederate generals met in 1867 to form a Southern statewide terrorist KKK, expanding the little project they started 2 years before in Pulaski, Tennessee. He was then given Rothschild money to create it out of the annals of both the Khazarian Mafia in the Knights of the Golden Circle. Okay, both the Khazarian Mafia and, it should say, and the Knights of the Golden Circle. The organization he formed in Nashville designated Pike its chief judiciary officer and its golden dragon for Arkansas. And it was a few months after the end of the Civil War that had began on the 12th of April, 1861. So there was a direct correlation and need to create that for once the war ended, or to bring about the end of the war, who knows? And then it says also in August 1871, Albert Pike wrote a letter to an Italian Illuminati member by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini, where he predicted World War III. Why? Because Esau lives by the sword. So they plan wars. And so this is just an indicator of where we are right now and the things that are going down right now. So I want to start with a little bit of history on the Khazars, and that is because the Rothschilds are related to them. And so I'm going to try and sum this up quickly. This was in a recent video that went around on YouTube for a lot of people, from a Christian person of color, but I don't necessarily agree with everything said, but it's a good source of some information. So anyway, speaking of the Rothschilds, because they tie into all of this, they're one of the 1% leading families, and they were descended from the Bacharach family, the suffix of that being Iraq. They were from Iraq, the moon city of the Babylonians, okay? And they changed their name to Sassoon, like the Sassanians. You see this brother in the background on the right, he is a Sassanian. You see he's got that kind of large forehead. So the Rothschilds also changed their name to Aziza and eventually to Rothschilds. But anyway, they control the global drug trade, and they're ranked number 7th by Interpol in terms of that. And their history is that they converted to Judaism, and Leo of the Khazar, the father of the Khazarians, plundered the temple and took the scroll and converted to Judaism. And as I said, they're connected to the Sassoon bloodline. And at that point, they traveled to India and began the global drug trade and trafficking. So they got control of the opium trade, and that enabled them to control the world. In 1972, they migrated from Iraq, Baghdad to India and set up the Golden Triangle, okay? The cocaine triangle and the opium drug trade. They call themselves crypto Jews. All right, but privately they're Egyptians, Moroccans, Mongolians. and Turkish, and they're Horites from Mount Seir. And they also link to the Arabs. So crypto means that they outwardly say they're Jews or Arabs, and then inwardly they're worshiping these other gods, Babylonian gods. They are related to Amalek. I'm just kind of summing this up. I'm not reading it straight through. Take a screenshot if you want to. They then set up the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. Muhammad bin Solomon set it up, and then they masqueraded as Muslims. All right, but in reality, they were domain Jews. Okay, so that means, and they practiced sorcery. So that's Babylonianism. Set up the House of Saud in order to take over the oil market and supply in Saudi Arabia. And that's what the movie Lawrence of Arabia is all about. So domain Jews means that they were Zionists. That means they believed in the state of Israel, but not the nation. The people are the nation of Israel, okay? But Zionism is not spiritually based on the word. It is a state that is created and designed. So we know the true nation of Israel is those who came on slave ships. So once again, the Rothschilds are ranked 7 with Interpol for the drug trade. Why? Because in the 1850s, Rockefeller colonized India, and Rothschild's Sassoon family got the monopoly rights over the opium trade, which they used to destroy the Qing dynasty, the Cain dynasty. So Xi Jinping, the leader of China, is a descendant. Remember, if you see in the notes at the beginning, they say they're descended from the dragon people. Now, just watch out, you guys, because they're trying to create a false dichotomy here, but they're really all related together. Okay, so again, and I'm going to show it, this time we're in right now is all about narratives. We're still in the false dichotomy, false narrative realm. This is just some history. Take it with a grain of salt. All right. Notice how king sounds like king, right? The term, a Canaan term for a leader, Khan or king. Canaan is not allowed to be grafted in scripture, nor is the fallen seeds of the Horites. However, after Yahusha, he does allow the Canaanites to become grafted in. All right, the Ukraine and the Rothschilds own 85% of human trafficking. So these Iraqi Moon City people who are perpetrating as Hebrews and Jews used to build underground tunnels to traffic children through. And they were known as Marduk. That's like Marduk, Babylon. And they are connected to Genghis Khan and Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler. So that is Dracula. All right. And he's the father of the draconian system, which used to impale and eat children. Christopher Columbus was a Khazarian. Remember I said the Batu was ruler of the Huns? That's who they are, the Batu again. Okay, so you see it's the Black Edomites and it's these people who are running the slave trade. That's why you can't say it's white people. Edom is white. We've seen very clearly Edom is black and he's white. These are the white Edomites, and what we saw of the Arabs are the Black Edomites, because Ha-Satan, your enemy, is no dumb. There's no way anyone would have you strategizing for military if you haven't said, okay, let's get some inside agents. Let's have people running around who look just like the people that we're trying to defeat. That's smart strategy. That don't underestimate your enemy. Respect him. All right, respect him. Yah created him for a reason, and he knows what he's doing. Okay, and the Scythian bloodline is their bloodline too. Okay, so the Scythians, and you can see up in the top right-hand corner as the Scyths, the Sake. So this is relating to sons of Isaac and Esau, and the Scythians. They are, see it said Ish Kuzay or Ashkenazi. Okay, so there's actually, so Ish means wife or married to Kuzay. And they're an ancient nomadic people living primarily in the regions, this is in the top right corner of the slide here, known as Scythia, which today comprises the Eurasian steppes of Kazakhstan, okay, and the Ukraine, Volga, and the Siberian areas, okay? All right, so their bloodline is of Vlad the Impaler. The Bantu ruled the Hun dynasty, and they used to practice this spirit cooking where you see, remember they were doing that in Hollywood a while back. Miss Brogdonovich woman, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name properly, on the top of the slide there, all her spirit cooking. So that you understand exactly what this means. These people would do these rituals in line with the new moon. The sickle is the shape of the new moon. So these curses were dispatched and transferred at the new moon. And Zechariah proves, I turned and lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a flying sickle. And he said to me, what seest thou? And I said, a flying sickle, of the length of 20 cubits, and of the breadth of 10 cubits. And he said to me, this is the curse that goes forth over the face of the whole earth. So this is how they dispatch these curses on the new moon. So if you're trying to line yourself up with a profane day and disobey the law, line up all your holy days with the new moon so that you can, catch these curses. Another thing I want to say is that with this great reset, what is happening is that, so this is a book written by Charles Schwab, The Great Narrative, and it's all about narratives, stories waged in your mind. So there is the true narrative, which is Yah's narrative, and then there's all the other narratives, which are the ones of the enemy. And so the only way that you can line yourself up to succeed is by lining yourself up with the word. And what the enemy is going to do, and has been doing, is using these alternative narratives to churn and change the people's minds to move towards the New World Order. But one of the things that they really state is that in this, and I got this from Truth Unedited, that in this New World Order, it will not be a new normal. So the term normal derives from the term Nordic, M for waters or movements of the Aleph. So we were in a European society where the Norse were considered the Alephs, the leaders. Now, because the times of the Gentiles are over, that is no longer happening. So that's what he's saying. A new world, not a new normal, is now emerging, the contours of which will largely be defined by narratives that evolve to inform and construct the way forwards. So there's going to be new narratives to move out of the West being the controlling powers, and of course Africa will lead the world, as I've said. And the identity, they're trying to sharpen Israel for their purposes, the same nations that scattered it. And so this is what this agenda is about, that he's written about in the Great Narrative. This is the narrative of the Antichrist. Now, remember also that all of the men who started communism in Russia were Jews, and Lenin in particular was a Ukrainian Jew. All right, so keep that in mind, that it's the Hegelian dialectic, two sides playing each other off. Also, other things to remember with the whole communist revolution, that Russia was very careful to provide aid to the Blacks in Cuba, also in the Cuban in the Angola crisis, the Angolans were fighting against the South Africans, and Russia also provided military weaponry so they could fight against the South Africans and prohibit them from encroaching into Angola and expanding their right-wing empire. This was all very strategic. And even today, Russia is still trying to build relationships, good relationships with Africa, but still there's a larger game at play with the Illuminati, and everybody is sort of a puppet. But we know that Abba Yah is the ultimate puppet master of everything. So just letting you know that those are the ways that Russia has worked with Africa and really is seeking friendship with Africa right now as an equal trading partner. And they don't have the bad spiritual karma necessarily, even though I mentioned there may have been some involvement with the weapons that were given in the Lord's Liberation Army. They're probably the cleanest nation because Yah says he's going to judge every nation that has exploited Israel. And so they're probably the most hands-off, but they still, they got a little bit of dirt on their hands. The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For Yah has put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of Yahuwah be fulfilled. The woman which thou sawest in that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So that's Babylon. The 10 kings hate the whore, and they're going to burn her with fire. And so we don't yet know who the 10 kings, well, we know who the 10 kings are right now, but we don't know who the 10 kings are who will share 1 hour with the beast. Revelation 17:12 says, 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast. So what is that 1 hour? How do we measure it? I did the calculation, and a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. And that is in 2 Peter 3:8. And so if you divide 1,000 by 24, you get 44.666. And a prophetic year is 360 days. So that's how we end up with 44 years, 7 months, 7.92 months, so almost 8 months. I mentioned it because after Israel is returned to their land, then a whole new set of alliances forms, all centering around Africa, of course, and the Promised Land, which you'll see in my 1,260-day video, which is where Israel is repatriated to. And so what we can do is look at when the final incursion against Israel happens, who is with the enemy and with Gog and Magog to come up against Israel. These are the next 10 kings that pop up after Israel is repatriated back to the land, okay? And they're dwelling in a city without walls comfortably. And it says here, the word of Yahuwah came to me saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog and the land of Magog, Ros, so the Russians, prince of Meshach and Tubal, and say to him, thus saith Yahuwah Sabaoth, behold, I am against thee, Ros, prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will gather thee and all thine host and horsemen, and all wearing breastplates with a great multitude, shields and helmets and swords, Persians and Ethiopians and Libyans, all with helmets and shields, Gomer and all belonging to him, the house of Togarmah from the end of the north, all belonging to him, and many nations with him. Okay, so basically, this is who will be among the 10 nations. Now, after this scripture, there's various other people like Tarshish and some other groups who say, have you come to take a spoil? So this is what I mean. There's 2 sides to this story. So there are Gentiles and there are Shemites and stuff who are all on another side and I believe probably the Egyptians and the Edomites, all right, and Tarshish, all on the side of Israel, okay? So this is what I mean. It's like, see, these Ethiopians and Libyans are black, right? So what I'm saying is that, like I said, Satan plays both colors on the chessboard, and so does but Yah's fits the game. So don't buy this one size fits all thing that, you know, unthinking people are trying to sell you, because it's just too easy and too simple. And Yah looks at the spirit. Now the seed is the seed, and the Adamic image is the Adamic image. We're not going to play around with that. Israel is Israel, but nonetheless, there's everybody else. And so he's, you know, Esau is going to look just like Israel too. So it comes down to the spirit. All right, and so what's going to happen now? Behold, says Yahuwah, a people comes from the north, and nations shall be stirred up from the end of the earth. They shall lay hold on bow and spear. The people is fierce and will have no mercy. Their voice is as the roaring sea. They shall array themselves for war against thee as fire on horses and chariots, O daughter of Zion. For out of the north cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate, and none shall dwell therein, and they shall remove, and they shall depart, both man and beast. So this is what happened to Israel, and so this is what Babylon is going to be. And so notice once again that the different translations, I want you to remember that the King James says to cast out the horn of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it. That's what these four carpenters are coming to do. But this one says these are the very same ones who scattered Judah, the four artificers, the four secret society masons, okay? So, and those are the ones I talked about, the Persians, the Assyrians, the Tartarians, the Huns, the Arabs, the Edomites. They all kind of worked together. And of course, part of that was even some of the, you know, the Edomites working through the Ethiopians, and the Ethiopians were also Israel. Israel was mixed into all of these groups, and there was a transition. So in this translation, it says these are the horns that scattered Judah and broke Israel in pieces, and none of them lifted up his head. And these are come forth to sharpen them for their hands. Even the four horns that the nations that lifted up the horn against the land of Yehudah to scatter it. So these nations who are coming are the enemy, and they're trying to sharpen Israel for their own use, for their own hand. And the scripture says that they will exalt themselves to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. And so all of this will result in the second Exodus. Let's look at some of the military bases and how they're set up right now currently in Africa to see where the alliances fall against America.
The rising number of foreign military bases in Africa has become very worrying to many on the continent, with 13 foreign countries and 25 out of the 55 African countries having non-military bases. Welcome to Tunacheki, and in this video, Tunacheki presents the top 10 African countries with the most foreign military bases. This data comes to us from Andrew Ata Asamoah, a senior research fellow at the African Peace and Security Dialogue Project, the ISS, located in Addis Ababa. Number 10, Senegal, with 2 foreign military bases. This West African country has both the French and the United States of America military bases present in the country. Number 9, the Seychelles, with 2 foreign military bases. This small East African island nation has both the United States and the Indian military bases present on the island. Number 8, the Central African Republic, with 2 foreign military bases. Commonly known as the CAR, this Central African country has both the United States and the Russian military bases present in the country. Number 7, Eritrea, with 2 foreign military bases. This Horn of Africa country has both the United Arab Emirates or the UAE military bases and the Israel military bases present in the country. Number 6, Kenya, with 2 foreign military bases. This East African country has the United States of America and the United Kingdom military bases and is also the regional headquarters of AFRICOM, the United States African Command. Number 5, Somalia, with 3 foreign military bases. This Horn of Africa country has Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States of America military bases present in the country. Number 4, Libya, with 4 foreign military bases. This troubled North African country officially has Italy and the United Arab Emirates military bases, but unofficially it is alleged that it might have Russian and Turkish troops present in the country. Number 3, Niger, with 4 foreign military bases. This West African country, located in the Sahel region, has France, Germany, Italy, and Belgium military bases present in the country. Number 2, Mali, with 4 foreign military bases. This West African country, also located in the Sahel region, is at number 3, with significantly more troops in the country. We have the French, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Belgium military bases present in the country. Number 1, and the country in Africa with the most foreign military bases is Djibouti, with a staggering 7 foreign military bases. This Horn of Africa country has the most foreign military bases with the United States of America, the French, China, Germany, Japan, Italy, and Saudi Arabia, all present in the country.
Military bases in Djibouti. Some of the baseland they gave to China, the Ethiopians in Addis Ababa have taken back, acclaimed port areas, but the Chinese are still there. Now, also I want to say here with Africa that South Africa is a factor, and obviously Nigeria, right? And very recently, the Russians landed in South Africa to see if there were any alliances, military alliances to be made. And so this is when I'm talking about the door, the open door to the promised land. And that open door is actually Djibouti, because that's where all the military people are aggregated. And so this is not just the scramble for Africa. This is the war against the true people of Israel. Now, this is the true land. Sorry to hurt your feelings, 10 tribes in America, but obviously the 10 tribes are just like the wonderful ooey gooey caramelized cinnamon crust on the peach cobbler that, you know, got left over on the side of Florida, and obviously the Caribbean is Africa. It's got the red soil, right? That's probably around where Eden is and the 7 streams are, but you guys are on the other side.
And let me be clear about that. Those are the pieces of land that are left over from the Great Divide, and the 10 tribes are still guarding that middle land, which is this Eden in the center of the earth, okay? And so they just got left on the other side there. And it's really ironic because there's a lot of Ephraimite 10 tribes that are on the far west coast of Africa, okay? So you can see how being shipping people, they might have been going back and forth, right? And so it's like they're almost like they're on either side of the divide. Well, they are actually. And so please remember that. And so we're going to go into the land of Eden because, you know, this is what the 10 tribes have really clung to as the true land. And I believe they're right. So let's get into a little bit more here.
So this is the prophecy of the military defeat of the oppressor, hammer of the earth, and oppressor of Israel. The context of this prophecy, north, south, east, and west, are the four winds that you need to create a whirlwind. And Yah comes like a whirlwind. And there are, in this context, there's another nation that comes like a whirlwind, being used of Yah, okay? Now, the other thing I want to say about this is that the designation of the Babylonian king is not indicated directly by naming him. You have to deduce from reading this who he is by directional bearings. Okay, am I making sense? So four winds, there's a north, south, east, and west wind, and we deduct by who is not cited, the direction that is not cited, who this king of Babylon is. If we look at this prophecy, looking at Africa and, of course, the center of the earth, former Atlantis, being the place where the Most High resides in Mount Zion. When we read this prophecy, this is how we can begin to read it. What it starts off with is in Daniel 11:40, it says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." So that is the king of the north. That would be Russia. Okay, so Russia is prodding this wicked Babylonian king, and that king comes into the lands and starts to pass over them. Once again, the gates of Gibraltar or the pillars of Hercules might actually be where this door is. All right. So that may be the door to Africa, the place where this all is pushed at and pushed open. The two-leaf gates. Now, of course, it is the people themselves who are the doors and the gates. But I just want you to consider that and consider perhaps, maybe, that there is an Eden, Mount Zion at the center of the earth. So this is a picture of this rogue king pushing at Russia, all right, provoking Russia. Now, of course, Russia is clearing the Ukrainians out of the land of Shem, so they're not out of order in that respect, based on the designations of the land. At that time, shall the king of the south now push at this rogue king. Okay, so that's like Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa. Looks like it might be shaping up that way. So he shall push at him, king of the south. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So he's going to go into many lands, but I'm thinking he's going to go into the land that everyone's contending over right now, Africa. And so I don't think this is the full-on Antichrist. I think this is the king of Babylon, possibly, because it says he'll come to his, what happens in the end, right? It's not the coming of Yahusha. It's something else that is happening to cause him to come to an end. That's why I think this he they're talking about is the king of Babylon, a kind of Antichrist. And he shall enter also into a glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, the descendants of Lot and Jordan, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So this king already has power over the whole earth. And in this war, he'll have the power of Egypt and the Ethiopians on his side. Okay, he'll have the Ethiopians and Egypt on his side. That's why I say there's also South Africa and there's other nations that could come against him from the south. So, as I've said before, I did this teaching before and I got it from one of my teachers, Prince Israel, based on the land that is called Israel right now. But like I said, I'm reapplying this prophecy here in this context. So at the next stage here, it says, but tidings out of the east, that is India, Iran, and China, and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and utterly make away many. Okay, so it seems like he's just on a rampage now because he's actually at war with all of these carpenters. And this part is really curious. So it says, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So this is a really curious scripture. So obviously, you know, this is the story of his defeat. So he's going to be left in a place where he has no help, and he's going to realize that kingdom is over. But where does he plant his tabernacle? Where has he planted his tabernacle? In the glorious holy mountain. His palace is between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. So Enoch 24:11 says, and I went from there to another place and saw a mountain of fire flashing both by day and night. And I proceeded towards it and perceived 7 splendid mountains, which were all different from each other. Their stones were brilliant and beautiful. All were brilliant and splendid to behold, and beautiful was the surface. 3 mountains were towards the east, strengthened by being placed one upon another. And the 3 were towards the south, strengthened in a similar way. And there were likewise deep valleys, which did not approach each other. And the 7th mountain was in the midst of them. And he answered to me, saying, that mountain which you behold, the extent of whose head resembles the seat of the Lord, will be the seat on which shall sit the holy and great Elohim of glory, everlasting King, when he shall come and descend to visit the earth with goodness. So this is where Mount Zion is. Remember, this is just my theory. This is not an absolute Rhema word. I've talked about this before. I've said that in Isaiah 11:15, Yahuwah will smite the 7 streams at the time of the second Exodus, right? He'll make desolate the sea of Egypt. He shall lay his hand on the river with a strong wind, and he shall smite the 7 channels, so that men shall pass through it dry shod, and there shall be a passage for my people that is left in Egypt, and it shall be to Israel as the day when he came forth out of the land of Egypt. So this is the second Exodus, and this is where, in the midst of the seas, where this rogue king tries to plant his tabernacle, right? And I will make desolate the mountains and hills, and will dry up the grass, and I will make the rivers and islands dry up the pools, and I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not, and I will cause them to tread paths which they have not known, and I will turn darkness into light for them, and crooked things into straight, These things will I do and will not forsake them. If you pass through the water, I am with thee, and the river shall not overflow thee. And if thou go through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. The flame shall not burn thee. I am thy Elohim. I am Yahuwah, thy Elohim, the Holy One of Israel, that saves thee. I have made Egypt and Ethiopia thy ransom. So they're going to be ransomed. That's why they're fighting with that king whose direction we haven't gotten an indication of yet. And given the Sabians for thee. Since thou becamest precious in my sight, thou hast become glorious, and I have loved thee, and I will give men for thee, and princes for thy life. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. And I will say to the north, bring, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from the land afar off, and my daughters from the ends of the earth, even all who are called by my name. For I have prepared him for my glory, and I have formed him and have made him. So these secret things belong to Yahuwah, our Elohim, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, to do all the words of Torah, of the law. So hallelujah. So that is the revelation, potentially, if this theory is correct. All right. We look at these directional indicators of north, south, east, and west. We see that the king of the north is coming from the north, that there is an African king coming from the south, and it doesn't seem like it's Ethiopia or Egypt. And then from the so-called east, well, it'd have to be the east if it's India coming and China, all right, are coming from the east. So the one direction we are missing is in this whirlwind, because it takes 4 winds to create a whirlwind. What is the final direction we are missing? So you answered correctly. Yes, it is the west. The west is not mentioned. So he is the king of the west. He is the king of Babylon. He is the king of Egypt. And that is Amorite. Now, I believe the 2-leaved gates are the gates of Gibraltar, and that possibly Eden is sitting there at the mouth of those gates. And that's a place in the midst of the sea. And of course, the army coming from the north always indicates judgment. The north wind often indicates judgment. For anybody who's out there, no matter what your ethnic background is, all you have to do is join the house of Israel. And it's for Yahudi first, and then for the Gentile. All right, and if you are Jewish or you're a Gentile and you thought you were Israel, you thought you were the people of the promise, yes, you are, because it was given to you to make this choice in this time to receive Yahusha HaMashiach, especially as we approach Passover, so that you can have the blood on your doorpost, so that death may pass over you in this time of trial, and you can enter into the promised land. And so, Baruch atah, may Yah baruch you and keep you, and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift his countenance, and give you peace. Kumah Yahuwah, Rev Ot Yasharel. Kumah Yahuwah, return, O Yahuwah, to the countless thousands of Yasharel, in the name of Yahusha HaMashiach. It's about the time that the sea thing happened, I was given this dream. So guys, I don't know if I should share. I'm not going to share that dream with you, but let me share this. I appreciate the donations. It really helps me do this work. And I always refer you guys to come to, you just can hit intoalltruth.net or livelightwell.com. You go to the shop page and you can just make a donation
for Chaya Eat Life and Fast, and it's really to help you live life the Hebraic way according to the divine procession of life, Torah, eating Hebraically, understanding how to fast according to scripture, how to deal with disease, the cause of disease, how to detox and cleanse. And of course, the Moed Appointed Times calendar is also out, so you can follow the appointed times, which are a rehearsal for the end times. And these are the times that you meet with Yah in the heavens and with all of the angels who are ministering before him as Yahusha ministers before him, to receive a download, to receive a word from Yah as to what you're supposed to be doing in these times, to draw near to him, to worship him, and to receive a word from him. And so that's what the Moed Appointed Times calendar and convocations does for you. Now, neither one of these is a hardcover book. They're like each about 100 pages long, and they've got lots of colors and all kinds of sparkly things in them. And because you guys know I love colors. So there's no way you could print it for $25. But really, I ask for this donation so that it's a donation. You're not paying for the book because it's a virtual book. You're giving me a donation, and I'm giving you something beyond these teachings because I am a priest, a teacher in Israel. This is just a way for me to keep my channel alive so I don't have to work, and I can work on this full time. Because doing this work, I was not able to complete this today. So I had to literally just play the video off of my editing system. I couldn't even upload it. I was like, having major warfare. But anyway, it got out. Praise Yah. Hallelujah. So I'm going to also have some music on from a wonderful Hebrew musician. His music is incredible. So I'll be using it, and I'll be posting some of his stuff on my other site and creating playlists over here on this channel. And his music is just so reassuring. I encourage you also to listen to my sister, Felina. I did a playlist at the bottom of my page. I guess I should go to it here maybe on YouTube. And she has such a beautiful voice, and she simply reads the scripture, and her voice is pleasant, and it feeds your spirit, and it gives you peace, especially in these times, to just listen. If you have trouble sleeping or anything, just listen to the scripture all night. Because the enemy is going to try to put you to sleep because he doesn't want you to listen to scripture. So if you're struggling with sleeping, you'll go to sleep. But the word will go into your spirit. And a lot of times what you'll find is Yah will give you a word. And so I really encourage you to listen to her. She's also on Hebrew Connect, and to get that word into your spirit. And I'm really hoping she'll do the Psalms, because she really has that sweet, motherly, voice. So thank you so much for watching. Baruch atah, Baruch mishpachah, and please make donations. I had some people request the calendar this week's and just in the last couple of days, so I'll be sending that out right away. When you get an email from me, it'll come from a livelightwell.com email or an into all truth at yahoo.com email. So just be careful to check your junk mail, confirm. And sometimes I update and make changes to the calendar, and I will make changes to the Hebraic book. And that is because I'm always learning new things. And there's other videos and stuff that I've done where I'm adding information about the causes of disease, ways to protect yourself, that kind of thing, so that you can have it all in one place. So that's why I will send updates. I'm not emailing you saying, hey, come and find my stuff. I'm only emailing you with updates so you can download the latest version of the book. And with the calendar, you can download it to your cell phone. The file is small enough to do that. Okay, so you'll be able to check it on your cell phone. All right. And just you can see here some of the ministries I listen to. Teo Ministries, Dante Fortison, as you know, one of my favorites, and my first teacher, Hebrew Nation Building, Google Tube 2009. If you're looking for teachers, a lot of this stuff, Truth Unedited, I try to put resources in the community tab so that you can listen to more information on a topic. I did get some information from Global Spiritual Revolution, but they're Christian and they're playing the narrative and all that kind of stuff. But that was one of the sources for this information on the Rothschilds. If you want to listen with a discerning ear, if you feel you're strong enough to do that, right? In the spirit, which you should be if you pray. So family, I really encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. Please share, subscribe. I really encourage you to do that because in these times, people need this information. And you are, especially the Hebrew Israelites, priests unto the nations. And so it's important to understand the times and to be able to minister to other people. And this is a tool for that. And so I hope you enjoyed this study. And I pray that you have a blessed week. Barakah. And I know I encourage you guys to send me an email here and there. If you do send me an email, please just, email me a couple of times. Because I'm a female teacher, I like to limit the correspondence with people. There are people in my studies and stuff who I've grown to become friends with and so on. But I prefer, to do it that way and through the filtering of the male Hebrews who are around me. I got a lot of male Hebrews around me, so who are my brothers. And so anyway, I really appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate the encouragement and that this helps you. I love to hear that this is helping you because I believe that I was prepared for such a time as this. And so I hope I am providing a service to you in Israel. And if you guys want to listen to my Bible study with my Akoti sister, Annette, you can go over to Live Light Well. And I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that channel. That's why I may post music there and I may post more recipes. I'm still trying to figure out. Anyway, Baruch atah, have a great week. Love you in Yahuwah. Shalom.